about to enter into another round of negotiations between the European Union and Greece. Tell us what you think is going to be happening in that round of negotiations and what for you is fundamentally wrong with the terms upon which those kind of negotiations will proceed.
Well, let me tell you what I think is fundamentally wrong. There are no negotiations. There is a pretense of negotiations. As the WikiLeaks story that broke very recently confirms, there is a massive tussle between the International Monetary Fund and Berlin. The elephants are tussling and the little mouse, Greece, is being trampled upon. So there is no negotiation happening with the Greek government. The Greek government has effectively surrendered. The reason why I'm not in the ministry, thankfully for me personally, is that I was not prepared to sign the surrender document. The surrender, however, happened on the 6th of July, officially on the 13th of July of 2015. Ever since, the Greek government, is just waiting to see what the great powers will decide. And the reason why the great powers are so indecisive and the Greek economy is fading and fading and shrinking is because there are two tussles happening simultaneously. One is the one that I explained between the IMF and Berlin. The IMF's position is very difficult because they were dragged by European leaders. Remember, the IMF is effectively a United States-controlled organization, but has always a European leader. It was Dominique Strauss-Kahn, now it's Christine Lagarde, usually a French person. The French leadership of the IMF dragged, on behalf of Germany, the IMF into the Greek bailout. The Greek bailout was a very cynical operation of taking the losses of German and French banks and putting them onto European taxpayers. They call this the bailout for Greece. Effectively, they took the largest amount of money ever, and the largest loan in history, and gave it to the most bankrupt European state, the Greek government, not for the Greek government to use it, but to give it to the French and the German banks because they were in need of a second bailout. They had one in 2009, they needed another one in 2010. But of course, they couldn't say this to their parliaments and their politicians and to their citizens, so they disguised it as an act of solidarity towards Greece. It was no such thing. But of course, they never expected that money to come back, because the reason why they gave it to Greece was because Greece was bankrupt. Greece owed money to the banks. They gave it to Greece to give it to the banks. They never expected Greece to get it back, because if Greece could pay it back, they would have paid it back to the banks. So now the problem that Mrs. Merkel has, it's a serious problem, political problem she has. I mean, ideally, she would go to the Bundestag, the federal parliament in Berlin, and confess that, remember that money that we gave to the Greeks? We were never going to take it back. We knew it, and we lied to you. So she's not, especially in the weakened state in which she finds herself today because of the refugee crisis and so on, she cannot do that. So she's trying to delay the inevitable, which is what? A debt write-off, or a debt restructure, call it what you will, a haircut. So she's loath to admit that which must happen will happen. At the same time, the IMF has lent its legitimacy to this bailout by participating against its own charter. The IMF has some very simple rules. The most important rule of the IMF is you do not lend to a government that is insolvent. They did it in 2010 with Greece, and they did again in 2012. They violated their constitution, and now they can't keep on doing it because members of the IMF, like the Malaysians, the Indonesians, the Brazilians, are revolting. They're saying, enough is enough. We cannot keep financing an unsustainable debt. So they want to pull out of this. They want to force upon Merkel to go to the Bundestag and tell the truth. So this is the tussle between the IMF and Merkel. There's a second tussle. Greece is just a canary in the mine. Imagine that Cornwall was constantly in the news for 5 years as the source of instability for the British economy. There's a crisis in Cornwall, and it threatens to bring Britain down. I can assure you that if this was happening for 5 years, there would be something wrong not with Cornwall, but with Britain. So Greece should have been sorted out ages ago. The fact that it's not being sorted out is a reflection of the conflict between Paris and Germany and Berlin on what to do with the Eurozone. The Eurozone was a terrible design. It was the most silly monetary design in the history of capitalism. It didn't work. It's fragmenting. They know it. How do I know they know it? Wolfgang Schäuble admitted it to me. He said, you're right, it's not sustainable. Yeah? But they disagree amongst themselves as to how to fix it and what to do. In the meantime, they want Greece to just keep quiet, keep fading quietly in the corner, and not to create any problems while the big boys and girls decide what's going to happen in Europe. But they're not deciding because they are locked in a terrible, terrible conflict amongst themselves. Emmanuel Macron, possibly the only sensible minister in the Hollande administration, with whom I have many disagreements, but he's a smart chap, right? He put it to me, in front of others as well, it wasn't behind closed doors, that whenever he talks to Germany, and by the way, Macron is the minister of France who is closer to the German government. So when he said this to me, I was astounded. He said that every time he speaks to German authorities about how to fix the Eurozone, he gets a confirmation back that we are living through a new 30-year war between Catholic and Calvinist Europe, which is spinning out of control. That's Emmanuel Macron saying this to me. This doesn't come from a left-wing Greek. So this is the reason why there are no negotiations. We didn't have negotiations. For 5 months, I was not negotiating. I was negotiating for the right to negotiate. And I failed.